On September 11, 1997, around 7:15 a.m., officers of the Amarillo Police Department were dispatched to a gruesome scene involving the murder of Linda Jackson. Details about this case are limited. However, Linda's death is connected to the murder of Gloria Covington, who was found a few months prior. Gloria's death is also believed to be linked to the disappearance of Dorien Thomas, who went missing a year later and was one of the children who found her that day. As each case unfolds, it paints the horrifying reality of a deadly, confident serial killer. This is the untold story of Linda Jackson. This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This video contains graphic and disturbing material, including sexual abuse, extreme violence, and other traumatic subject matter. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you are sensitive to such topics or have experienced trauma, please take care before proceeding. Linda Jackson was born on July 2, 1962 in Grayson, Texas. She was a hardworking mother of 2 daughters with 3 jobs at the time of her murder. Before we find out what happened leading up to Linda's death, let's look at her natal birth chart to learn more about what kind of woman she was. Though we don't have the time of birth, we can still see by this chart just who Linda was as a person. Let's start with Mars, which is in Taurus and Saturn. This tells us that Linda may have been slow to act but unstoppable once committed, with her drive being deliberate, enduring, and hard to derail. Algol in Taurus and Saturn is one of the most dangerous points in astrology. Sitting with Mars tells us Linda likely experienced intense challenges and became a catalyst for others' lives. Her life was likely marked by intense turning points that involved violent outbursts from her or others, accidents, betrayals, or shocking reveals that permanently altered her trajectory. Algol's myth ties to losing one's head, either figuratively or literally. This placement of Mars in Algol can also suggest Linda was drawn into high-risk situations, either as a participant or a victim. Mercury is in Gemini and Venus, meaning Linda was a sharp, persuasive communicator with quick intellect. Her thinking style was charming, socially attuned, and creative. Gemini can suggest she was sometimes dual-natured, switching between warm diplomacy and cutting wit. This is the chess player placement, meaning she was able to anticipate moves ahead. The Sun is in Cancer, which is ruled by Pluto. Linda's emotions were never casual. They were transformative forces. The Sun here implies sensitivity, protectiveness, and deep ties to family or roots. With Pluto's influence, it intensifies emotions, giving magnetic personal energy and a tendency to hold power through emotional connection or control. It also suggests that when hurt, she may have shut down completely or retaliated in subtle, long-term ways. Looking at the Moon, also in Cancer and Pluto, this tells us that Linda's emotional world was deeply private and powerful, likely intuitive, psychic, or able to read people easily. With Pluto's rulership here, it can suggest her feelings could be extreme, either nurturing and loyal, or withdrawn and guarded if trust was broken. True Node is in Leo and the Sun. Linda's life path involved stepping into her personal power, leadership, creativity, and visibility. Linda's life purpose was learning how to lead and shine without ego domination, and to give without expecting constant validation. It's possible in past lifetimes, or even early in this lifetime, that she may have been overly self-sacrificing or stayed in the shadows to protect others. In this life, she was meant to step forward and own her power. Venus is also in Leo and ruled by Jupiter. This means Linda's love nature was dramatic, expressive, and loyal. It's likely her relationships and values were larger than life, generous, or exaggerated. There is a strong desire for admiration and emotional warmth here. She may have been generous with affection and a need to feel like the center of her partner's world. Uranus is in Leo and Venus, telling us that there may have been sudden changes in love, creativity, or public perception. It suggests that Linda often broke the norms around romance or creative expressions, with shocks or changes revolving around relationships, beauty, or money. This placement can indicate sudden breakups or unexpected connections, with a love life that may have had unconventional elements or fated encounters that disrupted her stability. DNA in Virgo, ruled by Mercury, points to inherited traits and/or genetic patterns or karmic programming. It could also suggest perfectionism, work ethic, and attention to health or details tied to family traits. Pluto is also in Virgo and Mercury, meaning Linda likely had analytical power, an investigative mind, and a desire to improve or control details. It can indicate that she transformed systems, health practices, or work methods, or possibly even manipulates through information. She likely noticed flaws that others missed, with the ability to weaponize details. Lilith in Virgo and Venus suggest themes of taboo, rebellion, or her shadow side, tied to work, service, or health. It could also manifest as tension with authority over perfection standards or expectations. This placement implies a rebellious streak against perfectionism or rigid authority. Linda may have deliberately broken rules she saw as oppressive. Strong Pluto and Lilith energies in Linda's chart can mean she was able to operate in power dynamics, either using control to protect or control to dominate. Looking at Lie in Scorpio and Pluto, this suggests potential for secrecy, concealment, or deliberate misinformation tied to emotional power plays. In Scorpio, this is deeply strategic and can be hidden for years before surfacing. She likely had a talent for concealing true intentions, holding secrets, or controlling narratives. This placement can be strategic for survival, but also manipulative if unbalanced. Neptune is in Scorpio and Neptune, meaning Linda had heightened intuition, mystery, and the capacity for deep spiritual or psychic experiences. Scorpio can blur the boundaries in intimacy, secrecy, or emotional control. This placement also implies that she may have been hard to fully know, even for those close to her. She was likely skilled in subtle influence, especially private or intimate settings. The Scorpio placements of Lie and Neptune mean deception is a recurring theme for Linda, with encounters coming from others, and even herself. Saturn retrograde in Aquarius and Mercury tells us there were lessons around community, ideals, and intellectual independence. Retrograde can suggest delayed mastery, with authority in groups to be challenged later in life. This placement can also indicate that karmic lessons are in independence against the crowd. She may have started out trying to fit in, but ultimately was meant to stand apart to fulfill her true role. Chiron retrograde is in Pisces and the Moon. Linda had deep wounds in compassion, faith, or boundaries. She may have struggled with feeling victimized or unappreciated when offering help. Retrograde indicates inner healing work was key before outward expression. Linda may have been betrayed after showing kindness, which likely led to a distrust of her own empathy. Jupiter retrograde is also in Pisces in the Moon, which means Linda experienced expansive spirituality and creativity, but internally. Growth likely came through introspection for her rather than external opportunity. Pisces indicates deep empathy, but also risk of escapism through fantasy, substance, or avoidance. Spiritual expansion likely began inward first. However, after years of introspection, Linda would have likely shared her wisdom with others. Linda carried herself with a quiet but undeniable strength, the kind of presence that didn't need to shout to command attention. She was highly observant and able to read the subtlest shifts in a person's tone or body language, and rarely missed details others overlooked. Her emotions ran deep, and while she could be nurturing and fiercely protective of those she cared for, she also possessed an unyielding streak. Once trust was broken, forgiveness was hard to earn back. She approached life strategically, often thinking several steps ahead before making a move. She could be both disarmingly charming and sharply cutting, depending on the situation. Relationships meant a great deal to her, and she craved loyalty and devotion. Yet she also feared vulnerability, often keeping her most sensitive feelings guarded behind a strong exterior. Linda was not easily swayed by others' opinions, and preferred to make her own judgments after careful observation. Life had tested her through intense experiences, shaping her into someone who understood the darker sides of human nature. She knew how power and influence work, and she navigated those currents with skill, sometimes to protect, other times to control. At her best, she had been a resilient survivor, a steady force in times of crisis, and a source of fierce loyalty for those in her inner circle. At her most guarded, she could become secretive, unyielding, and unwilling to show weakness. Linda's life path involved stepping into her own light without fear, to lead, inspire, and express herself openly, rather than operating solely from behind the scenes. She was meant to use her insight, emotional intelligence, and unshakable will not just to endure life's storms, but to transform them into a source of wisdom for herself and others. Now that we know what kind of soul Linda was, let's look at her death event chart. This will tell us exactly what happened to her that evening. This is a highly Saturn-heavy chart, which tells us a lot. So let's start with the AC, or ascendant. The AC and first house always represents the victim, or a starting point. We have the Sun, Lilith, and True Node all in Virgo, and ruled by Saturn. Linda's life force was directly under strain. Lilith suggests violation of personal boundaries and an attack that was deeply personal. The killer tried to humiliate, degrade, and attack the victim's dignity. It can be sexual in nature, but not always, and indicates forced submission. True Node here indicates a fated karmic event. Her death was pivotal in a larger karmic cycle. Saturn's rulership means her movement or ability to act was restricted, meaning she was being withheld, bound, or weakened by her killer. She was likely immobilized or positionally restrained, and ultimately overpowered. The second house represents possessions and self-worth. Venus is in Libra and Mercury, which points to beauty, appearance, or something she owned being a factor. At 29 degrees, it shows finality. There could be a link here to the last time she was seen alive, or something of value being taken of hers. Chiron is in Scorpio and Pluto, indicating deep emotional or sexual violation. This placement is a wound involving intimacy, betrayal, or shared resources. The third house represents communication or short travel. Mars in Scorpio and Neptune suggest aggression hidden beneath secrecy and often shows calculated violence, not impulsiveness. It also indicates use of force by the killer in a confined or secretive setting. Linda's murder likely occurred in closed quarters like a small room, hallway, or vehicle controlled by her killer. Scorpio here adds intensity, secrecy, and possible sexual undertones. Pluto is in Sagittarius and Jupiter, which tells us she experienced overpowering force, control, or domination. It also means there may have been a movement or location change related to the crime, with the killer leaving quickly from the scene. Lie in Sagittarius and Mars relates to deception, false statements, or misleading timelines surrounding the crime. This is another indicator that the killer lied about their whereabouts or spun an alternate version of events in the immediate aftermath. Looking at the fourth house now, it represents home or end of life. The moon is in Capricorn and Saturn. The emotional tone was cold and detached, indicating the killer was emotionally shut down. It also points to a location linked to control, authority, or even a workplace-like setting. The moon rules the descendant here, which directly ties Linda's killer to the end-of-life environment, and he either felt entitled to be there or had some history with the space. Linda's killer is cold, methodical, and emotionally detached. His attack wasn't uncontrolled rage, but about dominance and power. The fifth house represents pleasure, sex, and risk. Neptune retrograde in Capricorn and Mercury suggest confusion or deceit in a social or romantic context. The killer likely framed the meeting as friendly or intimate. Linda may have thought it was casual and safe before it turned deadly. Uranus retrograde and Aquarius and Uranus tell us the attack was a sudden and unexpected betrayal. With Jupiter retrograde and Aquarius and Mercury here, it indicates overconfidence by the killer, likely believing they could outsmart detection. The sixth house represents health and work. Though there are no planets here, Aquarius and Pisces suggest her routine or a familiar, possibly service-oriented environment play a role here, indicating work, personal, and/or romantic dynamics could have been intertwined. The seventh house always represents the perpetrator or face-to-face contact. There are also no planets here, but we can look to Pisces. The ruler is Neptune, in the fifth house again. This suggests Linda's killer approached under the guise of something friendly, romantic, or pleasurable before turning violent. It's likely he appeared familiar, emotionally vulnerable, or used an "I need help" type of excuse to disarm and lure Linda. There is deception here, meaning he was not as he seemed on the surface, and his true intentions were hidden from the start. Aries in the 7th house ties us directly to the 8th house, suggesting the killer's aggression is the direct cause of death. The 8th house represents death. Saturn retrograde in Aries and the Sun means Linda experienced slow, constricting, or forceful death by choking, strangulation, or other restriction. Retrograde here suggests her death was premeditated, with a karmic link. It's likely her killer had thought about this before, and this act wasn't impulsive. The ruler of the Sun is in the 1st house, confirming this attack was directly on her body. The 9th house represents distance or higher truth. Algo in Taurus and Saturn tells us Linda's traumatically brutal injuries were around her head or neck. This placement is a classic indicator of extreme violence. Its placement here could also be tied to movement or broader physical reach. It's likely that Linda was taken to a secondary location shortly after her death. DNA in Gemini and Mercury confirm there is strong physical evidence left or found at the crime scene, like hair, fiber, skin, or semen. There may even be evidence connected to travel, a vehicle, or movement between two places. In Gemini, it can relate to communication devices or paper trail records tied to this case. The 10th house represents public exposure or case visibility. Again, there are no placements here, so we will look to the ruler of Gemini and Cancer. Gemini sits in the 12th house, which means it's likely there is hidden information, withheld evidence, or private knowledge not yet public. Cancer's portion shows emotional public reaction and media involvement later. The 11th house represents community or networks. Once again, no planets. But Cancer's ruler is the moon, which is in the 4th house here, linking Linda's killer's emotional state to the crime location. Leo connects back to the Sun in the 1st house, which links the public perception back to the victim's identity. Lastly, we have the 12th house, which represents secrets or hidden enemies. Mercury in Virgo and Mercury shows calculated planning and secrecy. This suggests the killer blended into her life without obvious suspicion. It also tells us important information was deliberately hidden, a classic indicator for keeping incriminating evidence out of sight or concealing a key detail. It's also possible that there is still something physically hidden, perhaps the murder weapon or a personal item of Linda's. Linda's death event chart tells a chilling story. Her murder was deeply personal and deliberate, in which her body and identity were the direct focus. The killer knew her and had managed to gain her trust just enough to get close, allowing the encounter to unfold with calculated precision rather than chaos. It began calmly, possibly through conversation or a seemingly ordinary meeting, likely involving an offering of something pleasurable to Linda, particularly to inebriate her state of consciousness and fight. Once the effects began to take control, so did her killer. While raping her, the killer physically restrained and overpowered her. The method of death was slow and forceful, consistent with sustained restriction of her breathing, with signs of extreme trauma to the head or neck. Linda's suffering was prolonged, and she fought for 30 minutes before fatally succumbing to her death. The location where she was murdered carried personal significance for the killer, like his home or vehicle, which was enclosed and not random. After the act, the killer engaged in concealment and deception, hiding and altering evidence and providing false statements to mislead investigators. The emotional tone surrounding Linda's brutal murder is cold, detached, and methodical, driven by dominance and power, not sudden rage. Her murder was premeditated, and the killer felt a sense of confidence that he could control the narrative afterward. This chart carries strong karmic weight, revealing a fated confrontation rooted in betrayal, violation of trust, and the abuse of power. Linda valued loyalty in life, yet the person who killed her exploited familiarity and safety to commit the act. Her death marks a turning point in a longer cycle of hidden truths and suppressed tensions. Its ripple effect is meant to strip away illusions, expose deception, and compel all involved, whether directly or indirectly, to face what has been concealed. It forces those connected to her to reassess the relationships and loyalties they once trusted. It asks the collective to demand justice, accountability, and to stop ignoring warning signs or excusing harmful behavior. Spiritually, her death is imprinted with revelation and reckoning. While it brought pain and loss, its karmic purpose is to force light into spaces where secrecy, control, and manipulation have been allowed to thrive. The truth is not meant to remain buried. Her story continues to pull at the threads until the fabric of lies unravels. If you or someone you know has any information regarding the murder of Linda Jackson, please call the Amarillo Police Department at 806-378-3038.